Hello and welcome. This is NTA Tuesday Live and I'm Cyril Stober. Nigeria, like many countries, is yet taking stock of the marking of International Workers' Day observed every May the 1st to highlight the struggle for improved workers' rights and better working conditions. Now, workers are the live wire of every society, and this is understood by the Buhari administration, especially the importance of a motivated workforce for a vibrant, strong, productive and efficient economy. Now, while some say workers' welfare is paramount under this administration, as demonstrated through the bailout funds for state governments to pay salaries and cater for pensioners, others say much more needs to be done, especially about the minimum wage, presently at 18,000 naira. This is due for review. Now, how cordial is government-labor relationship? And is it true that this administration would always yield to workers' demands without heated disagreements? Now, these are some of the questions that we'll be asking tonight on this program. But first, let's get to see this report by Emmanuel Ayimiru.
The history of May Day started in Chicago in 1884, when working conditions were severe and workers demanded 8 hours per day instead of 16 hours. The implementation started on May 1st, which now becomes International Workers' Day. In Nigeria, since amalgamation of the country in 1914, labor unions have taken center stage fighting major policies of the colonial masters to the benefit of the masses. The first generation of workers emerged from the nascent colonial economic and administrative structure, which preferred forced unpaid labor but was challenged by workers, which led to the high point of resistance in 1941 and later 1945, when Nigeria's railway workers embarked on general strike led by Pa Michael Imodu. The 1949 Enugu Coal Massacre, where 22 local miners were killed for daring to demand for wage arrears, was protested by workers, signaling a general agitation for better working conditions. The history also captured fight for independence in 1960, the Kokori-led Nupeng anti-June 12 election annulment strike of 1993, incessant ASU strikes, the Oshomole-led strike on fuel price increase and workers' welfare, the Abdul Wahid Omar and Peter Esele anti-fuel subsidy removal of 2012, all are examples of protest against perceived anti-people's policy of government. The union leaders say all the engagements with government is to struggle for a better society.
Local government reform that took place in Nigeria was the popular Desuki reform. It is that reform that positioned local government as a tier of government, the third tier of government in our country. It is the same Desuki reform that made local government an almost autonomous system, whereby election into local governments are normally conducted.
The educational sector is said to have witnessed the vibrancy today because of labor agitations.
We have fought against the privatization of education. We have fought against the privatization of water. Labor movement has consistently insisted that government should put in place appropriate policies that will guarantee employment of youth.
The maritime sector, telecommunications, the rail sector, housing, and many more have created wealth at various times in the past.
Railway locomotives used to be running on coal, and it was the workers of that famous corporation that fed this coal to provide the needed energy to move the trains from Lagos to Kano. Today, in Federal Housing Authority, the workers in that industry have done a lot to provide estates that you see in Abuja and other cities in Nigeria.
The contributions of labor to nations building span across different sectors, including banking, oil and gas, the media, security, judiciary, and many more. No doubt, Nigerian workers deserve the best. Emmanuel Anyemiro, NTA News.
Well, that report sets the tone for tonight's discussion. Let's start off by introducing our guests. We'd like to welcome tonight Dr. Peter Ozoeson, General Secretary of the Nigeria Labour Congress, NLC. Thanks for being here, GS.
Good evening. Thank you.
We're joined tonight by regular face on this program, Senator Ahmed Abdulkadir, former presidential advisor on manufacturing. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure being here once again.
Also, let me welcome another regular contributor to this program, Dr. Paddy Njoku, Chairman, Fellowship of Partners for the Protection of Ethics, as Director General, International Institute of Leadership and Governance.
Thank you, Cyril. Good evening, Nigerians.
Okay. And let me also welcome to this program Frank Tietie, is a human rights lawyer and Executive Director of Citizens Advocacy for Social and Economic Rights. He's also a campaigner for the right to work and decent wage. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure. Good evening.
Right, as we always do, we acquaint you with the procedure. At the appropriate time, you can get to be part of this discussion in the studio. The various platforms will be on your screens. We advise you take advantage of them. However, for those who will be calling in, we say this every Tuesday. When your call gets through, do us a favor, reduce the volume. Turn down the volume of your TV set so we'll avoid the hurlback. And the best way to know that your call has been passed through is you'll see your name appear on screen. Once that happens, you know that your call has been passed through. So just go straight to the point, don't bother about the greetings. Just state your point, ask a question, or make a comment. And I guess we'll address such issues as you might raise. So welcome once again to NT Tuesday Live. Let's start by looking at the labor sector, looking at how it's been, and finding out from the General Secretary of the Nigeria Labour Congress, this umbrella body of the trade unions, how the Nigerian worker is faring today. And like some would say, it seems that, well, there's been a relative calm in industrial relations. Dr. Ozoeson.
Well, the position of the average worker today clearly is one that is extremely depressed. The general conditions under which the worker renders his services since, for instance, last year till now has worsened on various fronts. In terms of remuneration, the real wage of the worker has continued to be eroded. And we're in a situation in which, for most workers, the take-home pay cannot be regarded as a living wage. If we were to take, for instance, at the very bottom, where the minimum wage is 18,000 naira, we know that when the 18,000 naira was agreed and legislated about 5 years ago, that the purchasing power of 18,000 naira was at least something compared to today. Was certainly much higher, the purchasing power. The value of 18,000 naira today, in real terms, in terms of purchasing power, has gone down by more than 56 or thereabout percent compared to what it was then. But it is not just wage. The conditions of workers, for instance, as we confront the situation in the economy, and we say there is a recession, you then find that in an attempt to woo investors, foreign investors and all that, we have virtually sacrificed the various regulatory controls in terms of minimum standards that ought to be met. Workplaces have become increasingly like slave camps in many cases. The condition and terms of contract of the worker with the employers are constantly being eroded. And we're finding a huge and increasing incidence of casualization, workers not having tenure, not having security of tenure and all that. So there are a number of things that have degenerated in terms of the general conditions under which workers render their services that then need to be addressed.
Right. Well, despite all these, how would you describe the relationship between the government and organized labor?
Well, I would say that clearly there's been some contestations going on. You remember that this government, when it increased fuel price the last time, there was a disagreement. NLC never agreed to it. We tried to call out people on Nigerians on demonstration. A few came out, but at the end, there were those who felt they needed to give the government the benefit of the doubt, that this government, means well and all that. And we gave, but since then, we know the pressure we have been under from Nigerians. Those who said then that we should give the government the benefit of the doubt are increasingly coming on us to say that the conditions of living have become unbearable and that this government is increasingly becoming one that is not keeping its promises to the electorate and is not actually implementing policies it said it would implement in order to alleviate the sufferings of Nigerians. And so in terms of the industrial relations with government, we have had a running contestation on, for instance, the need to review the national minimum wage. We placed the paper before the government over a year ago on the need to review the national minimum wage. Government has continued to play games and dilly-dally in some way. And we reached a point where, of course, we are willing to engage, and we continued to demand. And we actually said, if you recall, in the past, that we set May Day this year as a deadline for government to put together the tripartite committee for the review of the national minimum wage, and that if it did not, we would not be able to guarantee industrial peace. And what happened, for instance, yesterday, even, you can see that the grassroots workers were even, more agitated and have reached a level of complete dissatisfaction and despondency that they themselves acted yesterday. And we believe that government ought to take a clear message from that to realize that the workers are not happy, the workers are suffering, and the delay in government taking those steps it ought to take to address some of these issues is no longer acceptable to the workers. The workers are no longer interested in waiting and saying, give the benefit of the doubt. They believe that something urgent needs to be done now.
Okay. We'll come back to you on some of those issues, but let's hear from Senator Ahmed Abdul Qadri, viewing the entire scenario that we have now.
Well, I want to look at it from the private sector point of view.
Yes.
You see, there are three key subsectors that makes the private sector. That's MAN, NASEMA, and NECA. These are the three subsectors that makes the private sector today in Nigeria. And NECA is the arm of these subsectors that is saddled with the responsibility of handling anything to do with the labor, anything to do with the employment, training, retraining of the labor force. And at the same time, given the statistics of those who are employed, those who are dismissed, how do you negotiate with this organization? How do you negotiate with that other organization to make sure that the labor force remain in place and working consistently to make sure that there is no any disharmony in the labor sector of any organization within the private sector. But unfortunately, what I don't seem to understand today is what significant role today is NECA playing effectively? Because NECA is established way back as 1957. But in most cases, you don't hear much of what they do to support the cause of the labor, to see that there is a total harmony in the entire private sector labor force, to make sure that everything is done amicably between the employer and the employee. So we have this problem that really needs to be addressed, and NECA needs to really sit up and do whatever is expected. Otherwise, if they do what is expected, what you saw yesterday at the Eagle Square, perhaps it wouldn't have happened if most of those people are from the private sector. So this is my first point. Thank you.
Well, fair enough. Let's move on to Dr. Paddy Njoku.
Well,
Government, labor relations.
I think I've said on this podium before that part of what principally causes the friction in government labor relations is lack of mediation facilities. Somewhere along the line, people think that the relationship between labor and government, instead of being that of two parties in a contract, becomes that of master and slave. And so when there is a disagreement, the master waits in the comfort zone of his office for the slave to come, and the slave refuses to come without accusing comrade here. When such a situation arises, even when they want to go for negotiation, the comrades warn other comrades that don't accept anything they're going to say. If they give you Coke, don't drink. So when the negotiation starts, it drags because an uninterested, neutral third party is not the one handling things and looking people straight in the face and telling them this is how it's supposed to be. Now, we've been talking of workers. Comrade talked about the workers, the Nigerian Labour Congress, Trade Union Congress. It's now talking of NECA. The truth really is that when the workers are suffering, virtually the whole Nigerian populace is suffering, because we're about 170 million people. In real terms, only about 10% of this population is employed and earning something at the end of the month. So for each worker that is receiving a salary, there are between 10 to 20 to 30 people depending on this one person. And talking about this, the wage structure, I have also said that we are shouting corruption. But the corruption we have is systemic in the sense that when you look at the wage structure today, you see that the basic salary you pay the Nigerian worker is an allowance to enable him get to his corruption center the following day. Because, I mean, I don't see how in this economy today, especially in this Abuja, somebody is going to survive on 18,000 naira with myriads of dependents at home sending text every morning for their medical bills, for their school fees, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a matter we need to take seriously as a nation. On the other hand, workers also have to understand that government, everybody in government is an employee, including the president. The president of Nigeria is an employee of the people of Nigeria. The Minister of Labor is an employee of the people of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So we should try as much as possible to also understand their own standpoint, the government, and bring them close so that through reasoning we can arrive at consensus instead of staying at our far distances with our guns loaded. The whole country suffers because when they say when two elephants fight, the grass suffers. We don't have a developed private sector that has industries all over the place employing people. So most of the people are hanging on their relatives who are employed as civil servants. And when this civil servant suffers, the rest suffer. And that's why I think I like what you've done. We should all come out and contribute to see how solutions can be
proffered because it's a problem that touches everybody. As he said yesterday, I was afraid when this thing started in the stadium because I'm a French sort of man. The French Revolution started in a tennis court, like a joke. Just that type of thing that we no go agree, before you know, if it spreads, if they see somebody like you, Cyril, with this type of your cheek on the street, they say, now one of them. Then you become a victim. So that's why, as much as possible, all of us should join hands and make sure we don't get to that level.
Anyhow, as the General Secretary knows, once a comrade, always a comrade. Right. Well, let's hear from Frank Tietie.
I don't think we will get to the point Mr. Paddy is talking about where there will be such spontaneity that we experienced yesterday at the Eagle Square will snowball into a revolution or a crisis. We won't get there because we have a lot of balancing forces as a country. We've withered through all of these before now. But one thing, essentially, is that there is need for sincerity on the part of the government, and especially, emphatically, on the part of Labour. Now, General Secretary is here, for example. If you talk about right-sizing the public service, I like to emphasize the distinction between the civil service and the public service in general. So everybody that is under the employment of the local government, the state government, or the federal government is in the public service, and including the members of the National Assembly. So if you consider if an issue like right-sizing, trim down the workforce, NLC will shout to high heavens, no, you cannot sack workers, you cannot do that. Now, it raises the issues of what is a decent job? Do we have decent jobs that can sustain families, that can sustain workers, that can maintain minimum standards of living? We don't have them as a country. So we are not even sincerely considering the fact that we don't have decent jobs. So there is this insincerity. Of course, there is a compromise between the government and the labor, organized labor, that perhaps we just need to maintain the situation, maintain the status quo the way it is. And then, before now, you have seen the power of labor. They have always won all the disputes against government. Very powerful, but that's organized labor for you. And what should really bother us is what happens, because labor, organized labor, like Mr. Paddy has been generous in mentioning 10%. I don't think the entire public service of in Nigeria does not amount to more than 5% of Nigerian population. Now, but you can imagine that for every time there has been a dispute, a labor or a trade dispute between any trade union, particularly ASU, the very powerful trade union, they have always won. Now, we do campaign for decent jobs, living wages, and workers' right to strike. But we have seen a situation where we have an all-powerful, very powerful labor union like NLC, TUC. Yet, they keep complaining about workers' welfare. It's as if the entire system, I hate to say this, but see, I represent citizens' interest against that powerful minority, the working class, that operates the system, that should even be responsible for the malaise that we have in the system, but doesn't take responsibility for that, but easily makes a scapegoat of any government, particularly governments of the past. And then we have a government, in this present government, because what I saw yesterday at the Eagle Square, as reported, is a situation where they have become fallen. They can no longer have their way the way it used to be. I hate to take this position, but as a matter of fact, we should speak the truth. They hate to take, they hate to, accept the current position that they cannot always have their way. I tell you, for example, it doesn't matter what we feel about strikes, but in Nigeria, strikes, especially in the essential services sector, to which most of them belong, strikes are illegal. But we have always had a regime of strikes in our country. Workers will go, especially government workers, will go on strike for whatever how long, maybe 6 months, more 6 months. I've had ASU going on strike for 6 months, more than 2 or 3 times in this country. Gets all its demands met, almost all its demands, immediate demands met, and then it goes back to work, having been on strike for 6 months. and demands arrears against Section 43 of the Trade Disputes Act, that you cannot, don't work, no pay, and the government is forced to pay. So you see, this insincerity, this compromise, and then what happens to our economy? What happens to our public service? Our public services are comatose. And so we should come to a point where both government and labor should take responsibility for the situation that we're in. So we should, in the vein of sincerity, we should now begin to propose solutions. Do we really have decent jobs in this country? Has the government or successive governments been innovative enough to have created decent jobs? And is labor sincere enough to acknowledge that it is not very much productive? Nigerians don't get the services for the budgets that are paid huge amount of, sometimes 70% of our entire budget going into recurrent expenditure, servicing the workers. Do Nigerian citizens actually get those services that 70% of our budget is paying for? We need some sincerity as a people.
The way he's pointing at me,
right.
people think that I'm this government.
Well, we'll respond to those issues, but okay. But we also have been we have been also around to talk to Nigerians, citizens, to sample their opinions about government-labor relations, and let's watch a bit of that.
I believe that greater or better interaction between government at all levels and the labor movement. For me, this represents maybe a major disconnect between employer and employee relationship, and there is a need to improve on it, both at the private sector employer level as well as the public sector level. It is.
And we have some states that's 15 months, 8 months, 7 months, 10 months. They are not being paid. So when you talk of productivity, you have to also consider how do they put in their best when they don't have food on their table, when their children are no longer going to school, when their house is under the threat of landlord, accommodation is under the threat of landlord at any moment they may be giving quit notice. When NEPA or power holding is threatening to disconnect their lights. So when you talk of change agenda, with all these problems on with workers, you may not really get best out of them because the best is not coming to them.
There is this, gradual resurgence of slave labor through the working class now, because so many governments at state levels, there are governments at the state level and at the local level that have not paid salaries to workers for months. And these workers are, also forced to go to work without salaries. For instance, you owe somebody 13 months of salary, and then you come to say, okay, I want to pay you. You now pay maybe 1 or 2 months. And because you've paid 2 months salary, when you are still having a backlog of 11 months, and most of the workers, because we were taught the act of saving through facilities. So we are taking facilities from banks. And for the 13 months, you have put me into a violator, a defaulter of that loan. And so even when 2 or 6 months of the salaries out of 13 is paid, bank takes it all. I still have nothing. You have not cleared your debt, but you want to force me to go to work. How do I pay to work? How do I feed my family? And in a state of that, in a state as such, what else do you expect? Is it not correct to say workers have become slaves in those areas? And this is not happening in very few areas. Across local governments, some are reduced to percentages. Even the whole salary itself is not enough to care for the people. It's not a living wage. Then reducing it to very meager percentages. All that, is an attribute of slave laborism.
All right, some views there, and I'd like to just go back quickly to Frank Tietie as a lawyer. And it's good enough you've told us about strikes being illegal
in Nigeria,
and people are going on strike and then coming back to force the employers to pay. Perhaps if we listen to the last contributor there, could we just ask this? Yes, in going along with what you earlier stated, What are the options of a worker who's owed 8 months' salary? Is it legal?
Let's get it this way.
No, just that point.
legal.
Really. Yeah,
How did the worker continue to work after being owed for 30 days?
What's
No. It's not a legal question. It's a factual question.
It's a factual
question.
It's a
factual question.
What should a worker do?
No, for goodness sake, you don't work when you don't get paid. No. That's the legal question. There is go to Section 43 of the Trade Dispute Act. It says no work, no pay. So when you don't get paid, don't work. All right, simple.
Let's
you see, it's beyond that. Now I need to quickly say this because I know that the NLC will respond clearly. I do believe that there is the right to strike, but we have a legal regime in Nigeria. Right. Strikes are obviously have been abused in Nigeria to the detriment of the society, to the detriment of the economy, to which the worker now lays claim to as being the basis for which he can't get by with the minimum wage. We want decent wages, we want decent jobs. There is the right to work, but in Nigeria, by virtue of the amendment, of course he knows, by virtue of the amendment of the Trade Union Act under Chief Obasanjo, strikes, especially in the essential services sector, are illegal in Nigeria.
All right.
I think that if we start dwelling on the legality or illegality of strikes or payment or non-payment of salaries, we may actually fold the country up.
Okay.
There will always be disagreements, always, and that's where we say parties must come together to sort out their disagreements. If we stay by the principle of an eye for an eye, we end up with a country of one-eyed people. There's a ministry where I gave services, and the agreement between us and the minister is that, look, minister, as long as you are here, there will be no strike. But you will not be the one to be negotiating. Use neutral mediators, and it worked. So a situation where we say no work, no pay. And we didn't say no pay, no work. Because that law did not state clearly that there is, if there is no pay, there should be no work. So you see, it leaves room for human management of situations. And that's why I say the nation is a family after all. We must find ways to resolve these problems without necessarily resorting to it must be strike, it must be sack, and so on and so forth. Serious countries don't do that way. And I think we are playing here because we seem not to be running very serious industrial economy. I mean, if the train, if you're in London and you are taking the underground train, it must be there. If it's for 8 o'clock, it has to be there. Whether the Queen is sick or the Prime Minister is in hospital, it must be there because people have developed a serious culture of work.
But there are also disputes there.
Yeah, and they resolve them. This is the thing.
Well, sometimes they withdraw services.
Exactly. But disputes don't last for,
strikes are all over the
for
world.
6 months.
Not peculiar
Strike is a universal phenomenon.
Okay. Well, all right.
Yes.
Let's have another look at it. So let's see how in the face of the challenges of an economy that's faced with recession, how do you take on challenges like this and disagreements and resolve them?
Well, a disagreement like this, obviously, let me say, like Frank, a barrister, and a doctor, who is the
trade unionist.
The trade unionist,
par excellence.
As far as I'm concerned, I classify them as activists. Because when you have activists trying to resolve issues, that issue for years will never be resolved. Because both sides will be raising voice. And when you want to come to a compromise, what you need is to lower down and come to some sort of meaningful understanding. And the way that you can only have meaningful understanding is to bring down the tension and exercise caution and how you address yourselves. Okay. And once that is done, definitely, then you will start seeing the face of mutual respect coming out from one another. Even if all of you are right, or all of you are wrong, you within yourselves, you'll get to understand, yes, we need some common understanding on how we can move forward. But the most important thing I want to say here is I will beg NLC to look at the pay of the local government workers and the teachers in this country. They are those who are worst off. Whatever you want to do in the area of minimum wage, those who are in the local government, those who are teachers, if they can get their 18,000 minimum wage as at when due, they will be satisfied. Because there are those who are not paid. Some are not paid for almost a year. So please look at that. Then gradually you look at those who are at the state. What do they deserve? Then you can now move to the federal. Because at the federal, they can be able to do anything. But local government and teachers, state, are not in good shape. But the federal government, the private sector, maybe these are areas where a lot can be achieved.
All right, the phone lines are open. We have our first caller, Umar Anachi, calling in from Birnin Kabi. Hello.
Anachi, as we said, from
yes.
You see, the way the workers' welfare, honestly, I think the workers are angry. What happened yesterday just demonstrated that workers were not happy with this administration. And it appears as if this administration is not sensitive enough to workers' welfare, unless if there is a change of mind. All the promises made last year to workers, as far as promotion arrears is concerned and other arrears, promises that made by the government were not fulfilled. And the same promises again this year. We don't know whether those promises are going to be fulfilled or not. Let the government be sensitive, honestly. There is no government in the world that can succeed without the contribution of workers. They are the engine room of any government. And even this anti-corruption crusade, it will never succeed without the contribution of the workers, honestly. And when you look at the Nigerian workers, they are the least to be paid. Even in West Africa, both here and Niger Republic, compare their own salary with that of Nigerian workers. You will see that they earn more than Nigerian workers here in Niger. So if you are talking of economic vibrance, we are vibrant in Niger, but they are paying more than us. So there is need for government to be sensitive, honestly. And I wish that the Minister of Labour is among the dispersants, that I will fire him with a lot of questions. May God continue to bless our country. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Anachi from Birnin Kabi. Well, General Secretary, a number of issues have been raised here to do with strikes, you know, strikes, frequent strikes, and
no work, no pay.
Right.
Yes,
and of course, the question of right sizing.
Yes, those are the three things I thought I should quickly address, because I think actually the lawyer here, I think he misses a lot of the points. On the issue, for instance, that you say essential services are going, essential services under the ILO conventions are known. Teachers do not fall in that category. You know, medical personnel do not fall in that. Even the police do not fall in that category. In many countries, the police is unionized and they go on strike. What distinguishes slavery, a slave order, from a non-slave order is the right to withdraw, to say, I will not work if these conditions are not right. And when you, the ASU example that was given, luckily that's the union I came from. I was a national officer of ASU during the Babangida regime, and we went on strike. If that strike did not take place, I even went to detention under as part of those struggles later on under Abacha. If those were not done, there will be no university system in this country today. And I think we need to start realizing what the value of some of those struggles are. In the contestations were not just for personal conditions, but for the survival of that system. That's one. I think that the other thing that we need to, when we start talking about this thing about no work, no pay, yes, it is inserted into the law. But if you take, for instance, university teachers who then go on strike, you say maybe for 6 months, and the system is closed. When they return, what happens? They sacrifice their traditional established 3 months vacation that they take annually. For the period I was in academia, I don't know that I took up to 1% of my entitlements that I could have taken on leave. Various other ones today are there. So they come, they start, they do overtime, they do everything to get that system back in order. As for the issue of right sizing, and therefore the population of the workers being this, that argument continues to be made, and I think people miss the point. If you take a private company, for instance, a public liability company, let's say it's a manufacturer, and you employ workers to produce a commodity or a service, the cost, what you pay to the workers is the cost of production. It is only after you have met your cost of production you think of what profit is established. And I think that if we apply the same to even the public sector employment, then we start to understand it properly. When people say, oh, so much percentage of the budget is just for these a few people, it's not a gift you are making to them. It is the cost of providing the services government is supposed to provide. And if that is not provided efficiently, then we need to understand what the constraints are. I go to the Federal Secretariat a number of times for meetings, and believe you me, there is no human being who will be productive in that environment. Almost the whole day, other than the minister's office, in which they will put a small generator to run, there is no power in that whole structure. And you expect, you are looking at your computer, you're supposed to have a computer, and you have to be productive, you have to conjure it by magic. I think we need to be realistic and understand how systems work. So these arguments, we are not an island unto ourselves. As like one of the commentators today just said, we do comparative analysis or remuneration, conditions of service in various sectors across, even within Africa. And even countries that we support, that we give aid to, all pay better than we do. So I think that we miss the point. That a society that cannot protest, a society that cannot go on strike. Yeah, it was. I found it interesting when the lawyers, when he started to say, well, like what happened yesterday, it can never get to a situation where it leads to general. I think you are missing the point. You are taking Nigerians for granted. The Arab Spring. It's not something that is created uniquely. If you misgovernance continues to dominate in our environment, you are going to find that people will get to a level in which there can be general rejection and general uprising. Okay. And I think we should start to understand these matters and not use law to mesmerize and confuse the situation. Thank you.
Now back to the phones, we have Garba calling in from Kanu. Hello, Garba. Garba is still there on the line?
Fine, sir. My contribution is centered around the fact that civil servants always are responsible for our evils.
Okay.
If you look at it technically speaking, and then the judge. Today we have a scenario where civil servants are the contractors, and it is what is causing so much problem, because the people would have been able to distribute the citizens, but you find contractors being shortchanged by the administrators of various ministries. And if you have a system where government funds can be used for an unapproved budget you find a scenario where many people will just end up duplicating functions. So I believe if we can help ourselves by finding a system where payments can be made directly from a central source of government to every individual without having to go through the ministry, so that you have a central payment system where every civil servant will be paid. If there's any observation from the ministry or demand for such payments not to be made, then it will rely on that kind of department or ministry that will be handling payment of salary. Because you have a scenario where, for example, people are shortchanged. Their salaries are supposed to be due. When government release their salaries from the ministries, they refuse to pay such salaries. They other use. So if we have a scenario where there is a central body that will be responsible for paying all ministry, including military and paramilitary, because you have a scenario where policemen are shortchanged, they are not paid their money when due, including army officers who also decide how much they would pay their officers. They in that process. So if you have a central body that is responsible with payment of salaries, I think that will reduce the excesses of executives in and government agencies.
All right. Thank you very much, Garba. Although parts of his contribution there was distorted, but we at least were able to get a few points that he made there. But let's return to the studio here, and let's take up this other issue, because we've been talking about wages and salaries, and the question of a minimum wage has been made over and over again. But from the General Secretary of the Nigerian Labour Congress, the argument has been put forward that you are in a situation where many of the states cannot even pay the 18,000 naira minimum wage. So the argument has been put forward. Would it be wise to now ask for more when even the current, they're finding it virtually impossible to pay?
Yes, no, we have heard that argument, and our response is, number one, I think that when we keep saying that many states are unable to pay, I think we miss the point. Because there is no state in this country that is not resourced sufficiently to be able, if it managed its affairs properly, that shouldn't be able to meet its obligations and pay monthly. What we see is that a number of these states have not set their priorities right. A state is telling us it cannot pay, it's unable to pay, but it is able to take all the perquisites for the governor, for the state members of the state houses that are at par across the country, the same, and there is no confusion, there is no problem. They are able to legislate as they are about to leave office for horrendous retirement packages as governors and all that. They are able to take, if you get the figures, what they take monthly as so-called security votes that are unaccounted for. Some go into billions even monthly. And you say, it is not that they are unable, it is that they have chosen to downplay the issue of workers' entitlements. To say that because some are not paying at 18,000 naira, then there is no need to review. Let me explain what that implies. If you take 18,000 naira in this country today, let's take Abuja. Let's take that on average, either people live in Gwagwalada, some live in Niger State on the other side, and they commute to town. The cost of transportation to come to work daily for a month will wipe out the 18,000 naira. So if you get people to work and you cannot give them at least sufficient to regenerate themselves, because the process of work is like you expend energy. You have to regenerate yourself. You have to feed. If you cannot, then that system is not sustainable. And therefore, the question we should be asking is 18,000 naira is sustainable? Is it something that can keep body and soul together? Is it something that is a living wage? Luckily, sir, an independent, non-Nigerian organization recently came to Nigeria to do a study and determine what is the living wage. They use Lagos as the basis. That what is the minimum that is a living wage? And when they computed, what did it come to? It came to 54,000 naira. Now that is the barest that is a living wage. It is published. It is not in Nigeria and all that. So we need to take this into consideration. There is a need to set new distance. Governors who cannot manage their affairs and they say they cannot pay that minimum. What it suggests is that they are tilting towards a failed state and they should resign if they cannot manage their affairs properly.
All right, we have Farouk on the line. Farouk is calling in from Kebbi. Hello, Farouk.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I think the comrade there has explained everything. The state governors know that they cannot pay. They refuse to pay. They just deliberately refuse to pay. And I just want to ask a question. During a petroleum pump price increase, the Minister of Labor and unfortunately another person that happens to be a comrade, the governor of Edo, former governor of Edo State, rubbed mind with other factions of the Labor. So I don't know which factions of the Labor do the present administration recognize. Is it Ajiro factions or Ayuba factions? Because this is as extended to what I call divided and ruled. It will not solve the problem of the government of these days.
All right.
So let them do what is right. And there is another problem. Some federal government agencies that were merged with ministries, like NAPED, 4 months now, they have not been receiving their salary. What government is doing to see that they reduce their suffering and bring their salary issue to an end? 4 months, they have not been receiving their salary simply because they were transferred to another ministry. Yes, please, you can help me, assist me, and provide an answer to that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Farouk. The one that we can provide a quick answer to, we will. The other one we'll get across to the appropriate authorities. But I think you raised the question of whether there was a faction in the NLC or which faction was recognized or which faction is. Well, the General Secretary of the Nigerian Labour Congress is here.
Clearly, you're right. The government played dirty during the last fuel price increase. The government itself, through the Ministry of Labour, was represented in the process of the NLC elections. And if there were people who lost that election and government itself, all agencies of government were party witnesses to that, and they so certified. When it became convenient, because they wanted to raise oil fuel price, they decided to bring parties that they had already certified not to be legitimate. They brought them, and like he said, you're actually right. It's an attempt at divide and rule. But that is not, ultimately, workers, irrespective of where they are, their interest will always lead them to move towards unity. And therefore, that divide and rule tactics will never work. And we do hope that government, in all those who played that dirty role at the time, like you have indicated, have learned lessons, and they should realize that that will not be a way that is going to solve anything. It only complicates matters, if anything. Thank you.
Right. Senator Ahmed Abdul Qadri, seeing that the country currently is only moving towards getting out of recession, the demands that are on the resources of the state, now I mean a state as in Nigeria, would they justify, like those who argue on both sides, a demand for increase in salaries? Let's look at increase in salaries, not also, you know, a upward review of the national minimum wage.
Yes, still talking from the private sector point of view. Up to this point, I think the utilization capacity of the manufacturing industry is hovering between 34 and 36%, which is still very, very low. And for any manufacturing industry that is producing far, far below the capacity, then it risks so many things. So what I will advise is for the monetary policy to continue what it's doing at the moment, making sure they pump enough foreign exchange for raw materials, spare parts, and other things for the industry to really regain their confidence, because now they don't have confidence much in the system. But if what the CBN is doing in the last 3-4 weeks will continue systematically, then obviously the private sector will gain that confidence, and then even on their own, they'll be ready to raise that increase through NECA, because NECA is always making sure that within the private sector they communicate. But the most important thing is to make sure that retrenchment should not be advised, and they try to make sure that that does not happen, even though some of the manufacturing industries cannot help. But the most important thing is, yes, the private sector should do something where they should, but basically most of the manufacturing industry we have in this country today is within Lagos-Ogun axis. What we have outside is less than 20% of the entire manufacturing sector in the country.
All right.
So obviously with the recession, hopefully that we'll get out of it. Yes, there's a need to look at what is the possible best minimum wage that we look at, especially at the Lagos-Ogun axis.
Now, welfare, should it just be salaries and wages alone?
Well, salaries and wages also always come with some allowances for some of the things they do, especially overtime in the workers.
Okay. Well, at this point, we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll put the same question to two other guests in the studio here, and hopefully we'll also go out and sample opinions. Stay with us on NTA Tuesday Live. We'll be back shortly.
Nigerians, our fearless officers and men of the Nigerian military are winning the war against Boko Haram. Today, all occupied territories have been recovered and Boko Haram has been degraded. Our affected brothers and sisters are getting their lives back. However, they are now after you and me. In our mosques, churches, schools, motor parks, markets, entertainment centers, and public gatherings. Be vigilant. Be security conscious. Report suspicious persons, objects, and movements to the police and other security agencies. The security of our nation is a duty for you and me. Nigeria, unite against terrorism.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
The struggle for independence had been a long and tough one. Our founding fathers and compatriots sacrificed their comfort and even shed their blood. We cannot at this point in history afford to spirit away their sacrifices for immediate but temporary gains of today. Let us emphasize what unites and not what divides us. Working for the unity of purpose with a stronger vision for a better tomorrow. NTA, growing with the nation.
Nigeria, the only country we can train with remarkable potentials to excel. Let us believe in ourselves and change our attitude for the sake of our country and generations unborn. Let us revive our cultural values, which are our essence as a nation. Let us renew the spirit of patriotism and hope in our dear country. Do not take or give bribe. Be punctual always. No more African time. We can't expect to be global citizens and operate on African time. Join the queue. Insist that people are attended to on a first-come basis, no matter who they are or where they come from.
Nigeria, good people, great nation.
Make you report any crooked person, object or wakajube movement to police and security agent demo.
The security of our nation now work for all of us, so plus including me and you.
Nigeria, make we unite against terrorism. Now, Federal Minister of Information and Culture bring on this message.
NTA Tuesday Live, a network issue-oriented innovation talk show.
Thanks for staying with us on NTA Tuesday Live. And we took a break and we said we'd come back. And Dr. Paddy Njoku,
yes,
again, the issue of just about pulling out of recession, on the way out of a recession. But there are so many competing demands and resources are said to be low. There are arguments. Would it be a proper time to ask for more? Especially seeing that many of the states can't even pay what is on ground.
Well, I pray and wish that we pull ourselves out of recession. But when a man is owed 12 months salary and you are telling him that you are out of the recession and he's not gotten 1 month out of the 12 months, he may not believe you. Now, let's start from Garba from Kano.
Yes.
Talked about paying salaries, creating a particular unit to be paying salaries directly. I want to let him know that that is already happening. There is something called IPPIS that is there. That is what they've used to weed out ghost workers. So that your salary has to go through this system and come to you directly. So he should take note of that. I'm not a spokesman of the government, but I know that very soon Tietie will be pointing at me when he's talking of government. So I'm not their spokesman, but I know that this is happening. So he should also take note of that. However, I am worried about this issue of governors' inability to pay salaries. I've never heard of any governor in this country that has not received his salary. I've never heard of any honorable member of a House of Assembly whose salary has not been paid. And the National Assembly. If these people are receiving their salaries, and of course, some state governments in this country, their lifestyles need to be investigated. You know that when we fly now, we don't see them at the protocol lounge, because all of them go by private chartered flights.
They do.
And I told one governor sometime that, my friend, Your Excellency, I knew you before you became governor. You were here in Abuja. Now, when you want to come to Abuja, you come with a delegation of 80 people, 300 people, 100 people. Are they coming to show you the road to Abuja or the roads inside Abuja? I also know a governor who is an ex-governor who used to come with 1 or 2 people. I used to stay in Ray's Continental Hotel, not even the governor's lodge. And people would meet him in the restaurant. And that governor paid his salaries throughout till he left. So we must also, as members of this Nigerian family, look into the lifestyle of some of these governors, of some of these governments. Some of them pursue elephant projects that have nothing to do with the direct enhancement of the standard of living of the people. And the basic things that are supposed to be done are not done. And you see, the way we also address issues, we're now talking of salaries. As you rightly said, there are other things that go with salaries. There are conditions of service that must be looked at if we want to belong to the present world. Some of us travel and see what obtains in other places. The average Nigerian worker does not measure up to his average counterpart in other parts of the world. And the question has been raised by my friend Tia here, should we downsize to be able to raise standard? And we're already in a recession, and we are owing salaries. So it becomes a quagmire. Can you maintain the workforce that we have now at a good standard? Is it possible? We can only do so if we make what is good for the goose equally good for the gander. When you have a ruling class that is living far way above the means of the state, some part of that state must suffer. And I think that is part of what we are suffering.
All right. Thank you.
We knew how our public service was. I'm talking about even before Jerome Udoji brought those, and I think what Jerome Udoji did with those reforms by that kind of increase in salaries changed the mentality of the public service. Now, there is this, you are talking about increasing the minimum wage. Now, you also consider whether do these workers deserve, or do wage must be earned. Wages, I would say, must be earned. Let me give you an example. There's this entitlement mentality in the Nigerian worker. Comrade Edson has been referring to the decadent federal secretariat, and we think we think it's as if it's some other person that operated it to this decadent and decrepit level. Is it not the working class? No. Let's make these distinctions clear. We have a political class that steals, because we read the facts all the time in the media, and then we have a working class that has an entitlement mentality that does not deliver services, and then we have a nation that is failing, and then we have the people that are suffering. And then this entitlement mentality on the part of labor, without always, and that's the reason why I raised the issue of sincerity. Who is responsible for the situation that we're in? You make reference to the recession, you make reference to a failing economy. Labor has always resorted to threats, intimidation of the government. Now, when there is this seeming conspiracy between the government and labor for the sake of peace, then the people suffer. Look, I need to make this clear. There is ILO, quite all right. It's an international, they give standards, but we have our laws made by the National Assembly. We have the Trade Dispute Essential Services Act that stipulates what are essential services. You see, law is dispassionate. It doesn't confuse you. That is the way our country is run. It should be run according to law. But Labour wants the country to be run according to its what serves them. It's as if the entire system is supposed to serve only. Look, I'm surprised that we are not referring to the working class in the unorganized labor unions. I don't know, not even labor unions. Unorganized labor, non-organized labor. It is horrendous. How many times has NLC addressed what happens to factories in Lagos, factories in Kano that don't observe minimum standards? Look, I am a human rights lawyer. Every day, even in this town, as far back, as early as recent as last week, we see horrendous violations of labor rights, that's human rights, by employers. He rightly said in his opening speech that, look, in the drive to open up our economy for foreign direct investment, we have jettisoned labor standards. But you see, nobody talks about what happens to the working class. Look, let me address pointedly the issue of increase in minimum wage. Yes, there is need, but certainly we must also consider and the need for sincerity in acknowledging that we have
a bloated, oh, by the way, an over-bloated public service. Now, you see, and then these were political settlements that a government that has not been innovative in creating. I'm not accusing one government. I am seeing government as a continuum. I'm even taking it back to let's just say from 1960 to be fair. We haven't had a government that has said, look, let us think, let us create, favorable conditions for the private sector to create jobs. So the government cannot enforce the Factory Act, the Employment Compensation Act, cannot enforce, all the labor laws. But the government cannot do so because the labor unions, especially the unions that are, that are in the government, that is the government employees, they threaten the government. I'm happy that accommodation belongs to ASU. For goodness sake, the facts are there. It doesn't matter how you paint them. In Nigeria, the strikes ASU, as a matter of law and fact, the strike, and I hate to say this because I know I will engender a lot of opposition, but the strikes ASU, all the strikes ASU have engaged in are purely illegal. And they have not compensated for the time wasted. Let me tell you, for example, how do you compensate the parent who paid for off-campus accommodation for those months, and then you come back, and then she has to pay again for another 6 months that there was no teaching. Meanwhile, ASU clearly intimidates the government to violate the Nigerian law. Let me tell you why there is this anger. If there is going to be a revolution, it is not going to come from the working class, because the people are very disillusioned, but they haven't even done anything. It is going to come. The reason why you saw what happened on Monday in Eagle Square is because the workers are now beginning to realize that their power to intimidate the government is weakening. That happened in the last fuel increase. And Nigerians were worried. What's going on? They couldn't challenge the government. Now, there's something about this government. I'm not an apologist of this government, but there's something about this government that angers the Nigerian worker, because somehow it is no longer business as usual, because we criticize the past government for kowtowing to the demands of the labor unions unjustly, to the detriment of the interest of the Nigerian people. We acknowledge there must be increase in minimum wage, but certainly this is not service we are getting from Nigerian labor unions. Certainly not.
Okay. We also have opinions on the issue of wages and salaries, and let's take a look at that and see what some of those we spoke to have to say about that.
If the minimum wage must actually work for us, is to look into the economy itself, because the people outside civil service or the public service think once they've increased the minimum wage, everything goes up in the market. And so the government should do its own part by really controlling the economy itself, so that the money they are trying to give us as the minimum wage can really be effective. Because if that is not done, it's as good as adding no salt to an injury.
The little mere salary that they are giving to us is nothing to us to take care of our family. We are annoyed.
The state of the Nigerian worker, it's unfortunate, because the salary is not commensurate to what is being sold in the market, and prices keep going up every day, and the salary remains the same. And with this economic downturn, we're going to have chains of depressed people on the street.
What government should do, government should look into the money he put into ministries. After they pay salary, every other payment, it is after it has been written, applied, and approved. They will now go to settle back and collect it. Not for the
Thank you. Even our salary that has nothing to write home about, we were told that 25th of every month, that civil servants will get their salary. Up till now, we've not gotten our salary, and they have not given us any reasons why we should not be paid till this day. If I'm not mistaken, this is almost the first time civil servants will be going for May Day, Workers' Day, and they did not receive their salary. Many people could not even come. because they don't even have the means of transportation to come. That is why I'm saying that we are not happy. If you talk about also the mega salary civil servants receive, compared with their counterparts in the public service and other places, committees upon committees have been set, and yet there's no tangible result.
Well, it's been said that there's a lot to the working class and beyond the issue of wages and salaries, and questions have also been raised about how productive the Nigerian worker is. And these are arguments that have gone on for quite some time, talking about productivity. While people talk about low productivity, that working class, there are also those who say, yes, there are certain things that productivity depends on, and you cannot have productivity in isolation. So let's begin to look at, the first thing we would ask the General Secretary of the Nigerian Labour Congress, who represents Labour here, is how productive is the Nigerian worker?
Well, when you take the Nigerian worker compared to some other workers in some other countries, you'll clearly say that, yes, the level of productivity is low. But let me tell you as an economist, that productivity does not depend on only one factor. How productivity is determined is you have different factors of production working together. If you increase the quality of capital at the disposal of a worker, his productivity rises. If you improve the environment and the cooperant factors, tools that he uses to work, his productivity increases. So if you are looking at what is the productivity of the Nigerian worker, it is not just the worker that determines it. It is the environment in which he works. It is the tools at his disposal to work. I had mentioned earlier the example of the Federal Secretariat. If I have, for instance, let's say what I need to do is I am in the research department of a given ministry, and I have some data I want to analyze. And I come in the morning, I need to meet this requirement within time to achieve this objective. And I'm looking at my computer and there is no power. I can't even put on my computer. At the end of the day, my productivity may even be zero. Not due to my fault, but due to the non-provision of the environment and the tools that I should have used to achieve what I needed to. That's one. Secondly, and very quickly, we will be talking of the salary, the condition of the worker. Motivation and productivity are positively correlated. If you have somebody who is paid a non-living wage, a starvation wage, a wage that cannot take him or her to work, and you expect him to be productive, you miss the point. Okay. These are issues that need to be taken on board.
All right, we're back to the phones now. We have Awal calling in from Kanu. Awal from Kanu, hello.
Hello, good evening.
Yes.
Good evening, you are speaking with Awal.
Yes, go ahead, Awal.
Please, I'm really disturbed with the way the human Nigeria is working. This is not living in Nigeria. We are workers. Personally, I'm a worker, government worker. My first appointment is still 2010. No promotion. And in fact, I couldn't even get up for my children's school fees. Couldn't even pay for my rent aid. I have been taking to court. I have been praying with God. How can he come out here and start complaining on Nigerians that Nigerian workers do not require, does not demand that? No promotion. Look at where we are living. The life in Kano is almost the same now in Abuja. So for him to come out there and start saying that the country on the private sector, we are in Europe of the government. And one thing that we always tell this government is, let the president come out in his own point, say it out, because most of the governors in the northern part of the country are afraid of what the president will say from them. The problem with the president with this state agenda is that they don't come out and say their mind. They pretend a nice horse here in Kano. They show they are with the president, but they cannot implement this policy. We are not happy. We are Nigerians, we are suffering. We control almost 50% of the workforce. So we contribute a lot. And someone will come out and get minimum wage. How much is 18,000? We are living, I have a family in Jos. I have going to university. I go to school too. I cannot maintain, I'm in court now, as I'm telling you, I'm in court because of renting. What do they expect us to do? I'm even thinking of that we are not even appreciated in Nigeria. It's just a way of telling us that we should go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Ahmed Abdulkari, productivity. It's often argued on the other side to say that, yes, not much. Well, we had Cheche there say that Nigerians are not getting enough productivity from Nigerian workers. So perhaps, does that justify not paying salaries and not getting entitlements?
Well, you see, if you are talking about workers in the industries, whether there is power to run the machines or there is no power to run the machines, they're productive. Because if they don't work, because there is no power, it's not their fault. But obviously, if they get to a certain point that the loss of power is becoming unbearable, then the management need to take a stand. And what could that be the stand? The stand is to see, will that be rectified so that these machines work consistently? Or will they stop it and then now do some other things? In that case, they may look at a situation where they will do some rationalization. Because rationalization at times is important to say, okay, now look, we would like to take 2 weeks a month and put all of these things back in place. Let everything operate properly. In that case, they'll say, okay, we're going to go for a month to put everything in order. Are you ready to take two weeks pay so that once we get this done, you come back and do your job properly? Or whatever the union will agree. So long as the union are in agreement because they don't want to lose the job, they don't want to do whatever that may cost their family, they may decide to take a position that, yes, we'll take 2 weeks pay, go home, rest with whatever we have, and then come back to continue with whatever we are doing. But at the same time, that does not stop them from getting what their allowances or leave grants are due.
Now, how does this sit with you? It's been said that there's a huge wage bill, especially for governments across the country, and that in order to bring it down to a reasonable level and improve the quality and perhaps even consider paying more, there ought to be what has been referred to as downsizing, right-sizing. These are not terms that sit very well with labor, for instance. And some argue and say, okay, why not accept a reduction so that you can maintain a quality level? What's your reaction to that?
My reaction is, I'm a private sector human being. I always like to look at things in a positive manner. A positive manner is things today are becoming more electronics. You do more of things digitally. Most of these people who are in the system, especially in the local government, some of the teachers, some of those who are in the state, even the federal, are not computer literate. If they are not, what do you need them for? Try to find a system where you can find them somewhere to go and allow the place to operate effectively and meaningfully with the system.
All right. Now that brings us to the issue of training and retraining as to increase productivity. Dr. Padi Joku.
Yes. In the first place, the public service is an area where you don't easily see the tangible productivity of the service. Senator has talked about a factory that, say, produces tomato puree. The machines are down. They know they must produce a certain quantity in a day to sustain the factory. The machines are down. They say, sorry, we have to shut down and fix. It takes reasonable understanding from both parts, and they arrive at some concord. they are able to measure their productivity because it's easy, it's tangible. In the public service all over the world, there is this slowness. There's a joke, an international joke, not about Nigeria. Say, how many public servants does it take to change a light bulb? They say 4. 2 to go and do the inspection, 3 to write the report, the whole house again to come and consider the report, and then 2 to go and buy the bulb, and 2 to climb to change it. That is the nature of public service. Unfortunately, we are combining this slowness with a certain obsolescence here that, as he said, some of these people are no longer compatible with the information technology that should make things faster. It's a problem that we need to solve. Therefore, a lot of training is required. A lot of readjustment to see what you can find them suitable for is required. But it will be more shocking, more difficult if you drastically say slash to 50% the number of civil servants in this country. As I said, each one has 15, 20 dependents. The economy is already in recession. So it is a problem that we need as a family, I've always used this word, to sit down. Not that, oh, you are wrong and I'm right and mine must be done. It is by discussion, by mediation that we find solutions. Otherwise, we'll get deeper and deeper into the problem. I saw in the papers today, a state said, we are going to employ 1,000 teachers. I said, there we go again. If you employ 1,000 teachers, you are not looking at their progression, how they are going to advance, how you are going to promote them, how you are going to pay them. The next government will come in that same state now and say, we can't pay. So these things must be studied. Retraining is very, very important. In fact, you can retrain somebody so well that it says, I'm sorry, I found that I'm wasting my time in the civil service. And he finds a better paying job. But unfortunately too, the corollary on the other side is that with a depressed private sector, you don't have off-takers from the public sector. In the past, I'm happy when he was talking about the past. Some of us who graduated early didn't want to go and work for the public service.
Exactly.
Eh?
Exactly.
I'm telling you.
Yes.
We used to leave the public service job, just like it said, for some, you know, excuse me to say so, because the private sector was vibrant and needed the best brains for performance and delivery. But unfortunately, when we started depending on oil, it became more lucrative to have a government job and stick to it. And this is part of what caused the problem. The private sector died. We need to resuscitate it.
All right, Frank Chichi.
You know, I didn't dwell much on the harmful effects of the public service reforms we had in 1976 under Jerome Odoji, which centered more on increasing wages of public servants. But I'm happy that being an older citizen, he can attest to the fact that there were times in this country where public service jobs were rejected by people of his own age at that time. The reason being that, and I want to use that to emphasize this point. How do you think that somebody manages to go to work after 30 days without pay? You know, and that's why I've been calling for extreme sincerity on our part. For you who's an arbitrator, you know what truth...
A mediator.
I mean, a mediator. Yes. You know what truth is. If you want to find solution, let us come to a point of truth and make some acknowledgement and say, look, we are missing it. I'll borrow that from him. We're missing so many points. One, the man will keep on going to work for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, because he has a means of sustenance in that work that ultimately destroys it. Now, Mr. Stoba, I am telling you as a matter of fact. Now, I am aware of an organization that owes its staff 50 months of salaries, and the workers are happily going there.
They go in there. I want to ask you a question, and I hope Comrade Son will provide an answer. Who is the government? Who is the government? Who are the workers? Look, when you say the government is run aground, the economy is run aground, who ran it? And that's why they don't want to take responsibility. No. You see, the people today who have the power to control, to force the government to do whatever they want, and then, as a matter of fact, they have always had it. For example, ASU. Now, are they not part of the system? Now, who ran? Let me make reference to. Permit me to make reference to the moribund. To NEPA. Who ran NEPA? NEPA was run by public servants. It wasn't run as a private entity. So look, until we come to that point where we'll speak truth to ourselves as a people, that look, we are missing certain things. This entitlement mentality on the part of the Nigerian worker must stop. At a time, you are not forced to remain in the public service. If you think the conditions are not right, leave. Why don't you go and exercise your innate abilities in business or in farming? Nobody wants to do that. So we want this, this lazy approach to life. Let me tell you, even at the exception of democracy in 1999, we had another range of public service reforms. Brilliant public service reforms. When you talk about IPPS now, it was as a result of El Rufai and Goke Adogoro's work while they were working in the presidency before we had a Bureau of Public Service Reforms. Now we talked about things like Servicom. Do you still hear about Servicom? You only hear about issues that border on their welfare, salary. What happens to Nigeria? If you're telling me that it's imperceptible, the growth or the input of the Nigerian worker is imperceptible, I will tell you no. It is clear. It is very visible in the current Nigeria we see today. We have an economy that's in doldrums. We have discontented citizens, and then you tell me that the work of the input of the public servants is imperceptible? No, it is very clear. We have a system that has been run aground by people who refuse to take responsibility for running the system. Look, only two classes, the working class and the political class. And interestingly, the political class is very, very small. And it is easy for the working class to point accusing finger at the political class that comes and goes. What about the working class that has been there for the past 30 years, 60 years?
Right.
So, well, I don't know if
yes,
it's time.
No, there will, certainly. But let's just get to see this clip. It's still on the issue of productivity. And so we will hear one or two opinions on that, and then we'll return to the General Secretary of the Nigerian Labour Congress. Let's get to see that.
To be done, because these people are the ones making the outputs of which is being used by the government. So how will you use them like that? This government talked about corruption, but fighting corruption, they have to start with the civil servant. Let them give them what they knew is good enough, so that when somebody is corrupt, when you hold a public servant or a civil servant, you can be able to prosecute him. You say, I've done this, we've done this. So they have to do something about the welfare. The welfare is nothing.
And Nigerians are not doing so much because of the circumstances that they are working with. A situation whereby even at this time some workers have not been paid. So you can imagine how much are they to give in. Government had to do a lot to encourage their staff, in terms of payment of salary on time, allowances when and at due time, so that the workers could give in their best in order to increase the productivity of the average Nigerian.
I just wish that the government will improve our welfare package, okay? At least so that they will motivate us. Because when you improve our welfare, you folks will be motivated to put more effort. It's only when you improve and motivate people that they will put more effort. I think the civil servants are trying, honestly, with the mega salary that they're paying us. We are trying.
Work ethics has improved in the general civil service. The civil service has been giving in their best. Work, they keep to time, they report to duty, and everybody is sitting and doing his duty.
Right, we'll come to the General Secretary of the NLC, and still on the subject of productivity and, of course, as you said earlier, creating the enabling environment for the workers to put in their best. Now, we have seen even situations where the current administration at the federal level, the Buhari administration, twice had come to the rescue of states in order for them to provide the basics to get the workforce to go back to work and hopefully increase productivity. It has not really produced those results. Why is this?
Well, talking of the bailout the federal government gave to the states. And unfortunately, such interventions are not ones that build ultimately a system. It's just a short-term intervention to tidy over an existing situation. But even those were not actually carried through. The first bailout, when it was being, because we wrote and we engaged with government, so we can say that we were part of the process that led to the whole conception of the first bailout. And when it was then coming on stream, we proposed that given the character of the state governments, some of them, that there was need for a clear mechanism to ensure that the bailout will be applied for the purpose it was released for. We therefore approached the ICPC, and we had an undertaking with the ICPC to work with our state committees in various states, now state councils, to monitor the utilization of the bailout funds. The ICPC came out later, in some cases, to document how those funds, some funds were diverted in some of those states. The federal government did not have the political will to follow up, to bring those states to book, or to ensure that they brought the money and deployed it for what it was supposed to. And so even after the first, second bailouts, and then subsequently the Paris fund, club refund and all that, you still find that as of today, at least 12 states still have situations in which they owe multiples of months of salaries and pensions. So yes, the government did that intervention, but it did not translate. It did not have the effect it was supposed to have in order to then bring about the impact, whether in terms of therefore cushioning the hardship and therefore improving our productivity and all that. That has not taken place. But I think that just for a clarity, I think it is important that we understand this thing. Governments, I think the confusion many people have is because of the dual role of government. Government as sovereign and government as employer. Focus on government as employer, and then you start understanding the relationship. If in the private sector it is clear, if a private firm employs workers, it knows exactly what they are going to do, and it pushes them to do those things. And the workers know what they're supposed to do. In the case of the public sector, initially, it was also clear because workers were employed and they were charged with delivering specific services. There were Greek extension workers, for instance, as civil servants. There were inspectorate in education, and they knew what services they were going to carry out. What happened is that government reneged on the services it was supposed to render, either in terms of facilitation of economic activities, and therefore people who were employed to provide these services were there without being given the tools to provide those services. And that is what, when you're talking sir, about in those days, yes, it was a matter of choice. When I was living UI in 1974, before, as we were doing our final exams, I saw a notice inviting me to the then Barclays Bank interview. I didn't apply to them. And I was curious, and I went there to find out, how did you come to invite me? And they said, oh, they checked the records in the departments, so it's not just those who applied alone. And at the end of the thing, on the spot, I was offered manager in training, but I rejected it. Salaries of the private sector were much higher at that time, and they have remained generally higher. So if salary were all, I would have either taken that, or I would have taken the UAC that appointed me manager in Benin for GBO at that time, because I was their scholar and all that. But that wasn't my calling. My calling was academia, and so everybody has a calling. It wasn't just on the issue of salaries. So I think that we need to understand it, that there were people who were called as a calling for public service, and they came. Really, initially, we were rendering service conscientiously, but situations came. Part of it, particularly under the military, and we started to bastardize the whole system. And those are the things we're grappling with. So we should understand it. It is not the worker that determines his work. It is his employer that determines and assigns the work that should be done. And therefore, you then know whether the worker is working effectively or not along those lines. I thought that it is important that we understand those things. Finally, I think it is also important that we realize, because part of the thing that is that if you are not paid for several months and you keep going to work, then there must be something. Yes, he's right. And that is for a government that makes its cardinal arrowhead of policy fighting corruption, they miss the point. Because systemic corruption goes through the civil service, the public service. The delivery of service at every point is corrupted. And when you do not pay people, that is what then happens. That even the saints, when you starve the saint to a level, and he's faced with choice of survival or not survival, even the most saintly will be tempted and become corrupted. So the civil service today, the public service, is beset with corruption. And if you do not pay living wage, you are not going to fight corruption. It is not just these pockets of huge monies alone that constitutes corruption. And I think that we need to understand the nexus and interaction of all these issues for us to be able to set what is the correct way for this nation to survive. Not just compartmental.
So as we begin to wind down, Senator Ahmed Abdul Qadri, let us look at how to further improve government-labor relations, improve on the output. Now, I mean, of the Nigerian worker. We're not restricting this now to just workers in the public sector.
Generally today, it's a known fact that the morale is totally down in the public sector. And I don't see any possibility of this morale getting back to anything higher than where it is now. Basic reason is all the governors sees this London-Paris club refunds as money for the next election. So they just decide to have the money stuck away for those who are going to contest in 2018. They are trying to get the money for the 2018, and those who are looking for 2019 want to make sure that that money is for 2019, because as far as they are concerned, this money that is called London Paris Club refund is not documented. So it's only documented for the next election. But if the APC government wants to be back in 2019, they shouldn't look at any face called PDP. They should not look at any face called APC or APGA. They should just do what is right if they are looking for 2019. Otherwise, forget it. That's my take. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Padi Njoku.
Well, the idea
Let's
is...
see. Okay, well, in your usual mediatory role.
Yes, the idea is not for us to draw daggers, even though I've enjoyed mediating between TAT and comrades. It's been quite interesting, but we have to recognize that as a nation we have a problem, and that problem is we have a large workforce that may become obsolete in our hands, and we are not paying them regularly. Something has to be done to start reforming them, retraining them, and of course the private sector we must look into, because the private sector will be the off-taker if we want to right size or downsize, as you were saying. For now, I totally agree with him that there seems to be little accountability about the Paris Club refund, and something has to be done about it. We resorted to these things because the oil price went low. The time we were selling oil at 100 and something dollars per barrel, nobody was worried. But it has come to open our eyes that we must be realistic as a nation if we want to survive. Suppose we finish with the Paris Club refund. Where else do we run to? After Paris has refunded us, London may not refund us. So we must start getting realistic. In fact, reviewing the whole system of our economy. And when we say produce what we consume what we produce, those factories have to be running and must employ people. More so, we are talking of the workforce that is already in the public service. My fear is the number of people we are producing that we are not employing. We have 180 million people, youth heavy population. I know you have CVs in your office, you have CVs, everybody is now a job seeker for some people.
Yeah. Right.
So what do we do with our youth?
Can't find any job for them.
When we can't even pay the employed parents. So I think it's an enormous problem that we should give serious thought to, and let nobody feel that he has so much money that he is safe. If these chaps don't get fed, they may start looking for those who are fed. And that's why you have to take care about your checks.
All right.
I want to quickly say that the solution lies in responsibility. Now, we feel, and I think I don't agree, with much respect for Comrade, that there is a distinction between the working class and the government. No. The sovereignty is in, like, the people of Nigeria own sovereignty in Nigeria. No, it's clearly defined in Section 14, subsection 2 of the Constitution. Sovereignty belongs to the people of Nigeria, and government, and they give power to the government. Government, the responsibility, the Nigerian worker, especially the worker in the public sector, must now realize that he is the government, the executive arm of government, that implements, that enforces standards that they have failed to enforce over the years, and that's why we're here. Now, when they take that responsibility, because that question you asked should have been, how would there be a smoother relationship between the working class and the political class? Because you find workers in the ministry antagonizing the minister, pulling him and say, give us this condition of service. You see, it is the government within itself. The government especially in the public sector, must realize that they are the government. They are the ones who have not run things well. They are the ones who should take responsibility for the malaise we are in. And at that point, now begin to think, now end like this. Does the governor go alone by himself to the bank to go and withdraw the Paris Club funds or the bailout funds, and then he stashes somewhere? Doesn't he do so with the active connivance or the active participation of the public servant who does he now want to distance himself that he's not part of the government? Now you see this collusion with the political class, and it's important that our system is put in that way, that there is a political class and then there is a working class, that is the public service, the civil service specifically. For
purpose of serving the people. But what we have is a connivance. And when the working class thinks that it deserves more, it begins to hold the same political class within the government. It is, look, they must come to terms that, look, it is they who must run the system for their own good and for the good of all Nigerians.
And in the long run, what should be the role of the arbiter?
Well, he has done very well today. I honestly think that the people, or the Nigerian people, have tolerated a lot from the Nigerian worker. And from the from the political class.
What about those who would have to interpret the laws?
No. You see, we have been doing our best as a people. The law should be followed. In fact, that becomes another solution. Compliance to law. If there are any persons who have broken the law so much, look at our budget, for example. It's a law. How much do the public servants implement the budget? And then they turn around to blame who? Themselves, the government.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Still so many to talk about, but as I usually say, no one program can take care of it all. And so I'd like to thank all our guests tonight. The issues continue. Some other time we'll take another look at this topic. But for now, let me say thank you to Frank Tietie, Human Rights Lawyer and Executive Director, Citizens Advocacy for Social and Economic Rights. Thank you for being here. Dr. Paddy Njoku, thank you for always being part of this family.
The party man of the house.
Right. Yes, I like that. And also Senator Ahmed Abdul Qadir, also thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Well, comrades, General Secretary, Nigeria Labour Congress, Dr. Peter Ozueso, well, thank you for being here. Thank you very much. And as they say, solidarity forever. Right. Right. Well, but organized labor is also part of the Nigerian people. So
yes, but
either
not
which
for
way we
themselves alone.
No, but
they have a responsibility to the Nigerian people.
All right. Well, so thank you very much also for being part of this program. Next week we'll reach you again on NTA Tuesday Live. I'm Cyril Stober. Bye for now.